What would you do if the home your family built with love had to be sold piece by piece to repair one mistake, one debt, one deadline, and the only thing left standing between ruin and survival was the hand of the person who refused to leave yours? The afternoon sun burned low over the red chili garden, turning every red pepper into a bright wound against the green. Jack's mother bent over the plants with a basket at her feet, her hands moving slowly, almost mechanically, as she picked the long horn-shaped chilies one by one. From a distance, it looked like an ordinary scene from a countryside life built on labor. But anyone who came close enough would have seen the truth in her face. Her hands were trembling, not only from age or fatigue, but from the fear that had lodged itself deep inside her body. The bank repayment deadline was only a few days away. The debt was no longer an abstract number. It had become a living presence in the house, sitting with them at meals, following them into sleep, and waiting by the door each morning. She had tried to remain calm for Jack's sake. She had tried to believe that he would somehow find a way, as he always had. Yet the question she could not silence kept clawing at her heart. Where had he borrowed the money from, and how much more of himself had he already sacrificed without telling her? The thought hurt her more than the debt itself. A mother can survive poverty more easily than she can survive the sight of her son quietly drowning under burdens that were never supposed to become his. At last, she straightened her aching back, wiped the sweat from her brow, and reached for her phone. Her fingers hesitated before dialing Mrs. Thu, because some calls already taste like bad news before the first hello. When the line connected, her voice dropped low with shame and anxiety. She asked about the land. Was there any movement? Any buyer? Any chance? The answer came exactly as she feared. The land had become trapped in planning restrictions. It was difficult to sell. No one wanted to risk money on property that might be tied up for years. She listened in silence, her throat tightening. Then she promised that if this plot could not save them, she would find another way. She would sell another piece of land if she had to. She would not allow the debt to crush Jack. When she ended the call, the basket beside her was full of red chilies, but her eyes were fixed far beyond the garden, staring into a future that had suddenly become dark and narrow. Jack came home carrying medicine and worry in equal measure. The moment he stepped inside and saw his mother's face, he understood that the pain in her shoulders and neck was no longer only physical. His voice softened at once as he asked about her health. She told him the ache was still there, even after the previous dose. Then, after a long silence, she told him about the call. The land would not sell in time. The debt would not wait. And because of that, she had made a decision. She wanted to sell the house. The words landed between them with a kind of quiet violence. She said them without tears, and that made them even harder to bear. She told him she had made a mistake. She told him that this house, full of memories and years and family history, no longer mattered as much as his future. If holding onto it meant destroying his peace, then it had to go. Jack stood frozen for a moment, stunned not by the financial logic of it, but by the emotional cost she was willing to pay. He protested at once. He loved his mother too much to watch her lose the place woven through her whole life. He reminded her that he had managed to extend the bank deadline by another 10 days. It was not much, but it was something. Time still existed. They did not have to surrender immediately. But his mother did not waver. Right and wrong no longer mattered to her the way they once had. The only thing that mattered now was preventing her son from breaking under the weight of a mistake she herself had made. She looked at him with eyes full of regret and hope, as if already saying goodbye to the house before anyone had taken a single step toward selling it. Jack felt his own heart twist under that look. In the end, he nodded. Not because the decision no longer hurt, but because love had left him no room for pride. He promised he would find the quickest solution possible. He promised the family would not be left without a path forward. In the kitchen, his mother kept working because stopping would have meant feeling too much. She blanched the chilies in boiling water, sliced them thin, and stir-fried them with lemongrass, shallots, and garlic. The pungent aroma rose sharply through the room, burning the nose and filling every corner with heat. As she stirred the pan, she thought of Jack the way mothers always do when fear grows too large. She remembered him as a child. She remembered his stubbornness, his kindness, his quiet way of taking burdens onto himself. The sauté reddened in the pan like a concentrated form of all the fire she had unknowingly pushed into his life. At the company, Jack was carrying another kind of fire. He sat facing Vin, who had come to submit a temporary resignation because of family matters. Jack approved it without hesitation, though sadness weighed in his voice. Even now, even when his own world felt as if it were cracking apart, he would not make another man's hardship harder. Once the formal matter was done, he admitted more than he usually allowed himself to say aloud. The land investment with his mother was stuck. The company had not secured enough new projects. The pressure was growing from every direction. Vin offered what comfort he could. Jack listened, then immediately called loan to arrange salary payment and another 10 million in support. He did it quietly, without ceremony, as if generosity were just another duty. His face looked tired, his eyes shadowed, but he kept his tone calm. He would not let his collapse become someone else's fear. Meanwhile, beneath the hard sunlight at the farm, Tu Tien was working with the same quiet determination that had always made Jack love her more than words could say. She bent over the chili plants, harvesting the ripe ones, blanching them clean, slicing them finely, and cooking satay with ginger, shallots, garlic, and lemongrass. Sweat ran down her face, and the work stung her fingers, but she kept moving. After a while, she called Jack, her voice soft with concern, asking when he would return. He promised he would come soon and help her plant the corn. That small promise was enough to settle something inside her. She went back to boiling sweet potatoes and preparing the corn seeds, her thoughts moving between Jack, his mother, and the trouble closing around them all. Yet, she smiled anyway, because she had already made her choice. Whatever burden came next, she would share it. When Jack finally reached the farm, the late afternoon sun had begun to soften into gold. He joined Tu Tien in tilling the soil for corn, and the two of them worked side by side without pretending the day had been easy. As they pressed seeds into the dark earth, he told her about his mother's decision. He told her about the house, the debt, the shame his mother was carrying. Tu Tien listened carefully, then gave the answer that broke her heart even as she said it. They should sell the farm first. Better that than force his mother to leave the house tied to her whole life. Better to lose what they had built than watch his mother die slowly under the weight of guilt. The words hurt because the farm was not just land. It was labor, memory, hope, and the shape of a future they had once believed was taking root. Yet Tu Tien offered it with the calm of someone who understood that love sometimes means placing another person's peace above your own dream. Jack heard the cost in her voice. He said nothing for a moment, because gratitude and grief had risen together inside him. Then the real estate agent arrived. Jack and Tu Tien walked him through the property from the lowest point to the highest edge, showing him the infrastructure, the improvements, the access, the documents. Jack's tone remained steady and factual, but his eyes betrayed what his voice hid. Every boundary he described felt like a wound. Every practical detail sounded to him like the careful unpacking of a life he was already being forced to surrender. Tu Tien stayed beside him through all of it. She smiled when necessary, added details when he paused, and kept her own heartbreak hidden behind gentleness. The agent promised to respond within 2 days. It was not hope exactly, but it was movement, and sometimes movement is all a desperate family can ask for. When the man left, the farm felt different, not smaller, but more fragile. In the kitchen, Jack and Tu Tien hung the drying chilies on the rack and spooned the fragrant sauté into jars. The smell of spice, garlic, and heat filled the room. Then they sat together with sweet potatoes and ripe bananas, a simple meal that belonged to lives built on hard work rather than ease. It was there, in that humble stillness, that Jack apologized. He said he was sorry for letting things reach this point, sorry that she had to carry pain she had not caused, sorry that the future he had wanted to give her now stood at the edge of being sold. For a while, neither of them moved after that conversation. The jars of satay sat cooling on the table, their red oil catching the last of the kitchen light, while outside the farm held its breath. Jack looked around the room as if trying to memorize it before loss made memory crueler. Tu Tien followed his gaze and understood without asking. They were not only considering the sale of land, they were preparing to loosen their hands from a chapter of life they had watered with labor, arguments, laughter, and ordinary mornings. That understanding hurt them both. Yet it also made their nearness feel sacred, because even in grief, neither one stepped away. Tu Tien did not answer with pity. She answered with strength. She reminded him that they were still young, that land could be lost and bought again, that houses could be left behind, but if they kept each other, then nothing truly ended. Her words did not remove the pain, but they gave it dignity. Their eyes held for a long moment, and inside that silence, regret and hope seemed to sit together without destroying one another. By twilight, they were back in the cornfield, planting the last of the seeds. The air had cooled. The sky had gentled into evening. Their bodies were tired, but the work steadied them. Jack told her softly that despite everything they were losing, he was still happy because she was beside him. He promised that he would stabilize his work and one day bring his mother back with peace instead of shame. Tu Tien smiled and told him she feared no hardship as long as she could keep walking with him. Their laughter rose faintly in the fading light, not because the day had become easy, but because they had refused to let sorrow make them strangers to one another. Around them, the field held the first small lines of planted corn, fragile and invisible beneath the soil. It was the perfect image of what remained between them. Nothing fully grown, nothing guaranteed, but something alive enough to trust. And perhaps that was the deepest truth of the day. Love is not proven only by how fiercely people hold on to what they built. Sometimes it is proven by the grace with which they let it go, the honesty with which they grieve it, and the courage with which they kneel back down into the soil and plant again.